The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality?
Welcome to the Jew Function. Seth, how are you?
All right, Leo. Here we go again.
Here we go again. Yes, it's took a month off to chill.
I was sitting around last night with some friends and family, and they were asking me if I heard that Iran was going to attack on Tisha B'Av, and I hadn't heard it, but it sounds, pretty much right on schedule. I was very surprised this morning when I sent you a message over there and asked if that news was circulating over there, and to hear from you that it's not. I thought that news is news. I mean, obviously the right and the left have their own news sources, but figure news is news. If there's something
anymore,
like that,
Seth.
we would all know about it.
Yeah, well, not anymore. You know how it is. News is only news, for the person who puts it out, to the audience who gets it. That's that news, and then there's other news, and it really depends on who you subscribe to. We subscribe to Nature's Plan, so that's a different.
Well, according to Nature's Plan, Tisha B'Av would be according to plan.
Well, would be a good reminder, as it's always been. But the thing is, are we going to take it as a reminder and be reminded and be like, oh, that's what it was about. That's why the whole thing fell apart. That's why all the shit comes down on that day, because that's when we were at each other's necks instead of embracing each other, right? So I think that's what we're trying to get to awaken everyone, to sound the alarm before we hit it. And I think we're coming really close to it, and we'll see this year where it goes. It's is it going to go south, or are we going to change course a little bit? What's your feeling?
Well, forever, I know you call me in the dynamic duo here, that you're the optimist, I'm the pessimist, but I do feel that deep inside I am an optimist. I'm always waiting for that miracle to happen.
It's just covered with layers of pessimism.
It's not actually pessimism. It's
no,
just,
I know. You're a happy guy. No,
it's for example, you decide you want to get in shape. Like it's not pessimistic that you have to spend the next 6 months working out every day. It's just, you understand the efforts that are required. So I don't think it's pessimism. It's just, you kind of understand that it is no magic thing that's going to happen in 1 second. Although, we hope that some kind of change in atmosphere will happen. Like after October 7th, there's definitely a change in atmosphere. I felt that in New York after 9/11, but this is temporary. This wears away, but the actual efforts that the Jewish people need to go through to unite requires effort. So I'm optimistic that it's
we don't like if we could do it sitting down with a drink. We prefer that. We don't really
no, but I think when you look at the pioneers of the land of Israel, there was a ton of effort, but there's when you feel like you have a goal, the effort becomes, not that it's you don't feel that you're making effort, but it becomes light work when you have such a big goal. I think we need a big goal. Humanity needs a big goal, and the Jews, as the spearhead of humanity, need a big goal.
And it's bigger than it's bigger than the election. It's bigger than peace in the Middle East. I think it's the big goal, right? The biggest goal there is. Like, how do we rise to the next level in our evolution? Because you could see, looking back at human evolution, you can sort of, even though there's constant progress, right? You can put your finger on moments that were a distinct leap forward, right? That wasn't just like a change or right, quantitatively things move forward, but really like a qualitative leap, right? Like something, like there was another
Mesopotamia or Abraham's time.
Yeah, well, I was looking further back, like like coming down from the trees, a fire, you know.
Well, it's the invention of the wheel, sailboat, agriculture, then the Industrial Revolution, the Renaissance. I understand you're going back to even bigger
Yeah,
cycles.
I was trying to kind of, and internet and all that, now AI, but I don't want it to be a technological thing. I don't want it to be something external, but somehow an internal evolution, something that we realize, that we start to feel different. That's what I'm after. I think you're after it too. And we've been lucky to get on this show some really great people who are sort of at the forefront of what they do. And today's guest is no different. In fact, she's an interesting person. She's like a, again, one of those microcosm of our of who we are. She's Mexican born, but to a Syrian and Lebanese parents, but she lives in America, and she's visiting
Typical
Mexico.
white Ashkenazi Jew.
Yeah, typical, exactly, totally typical. She was one of the Jewish Week's 36 under 36. Like we are, we are, what are we, 100 under 100? But she's actually that successful, and she's also an activist, an author, a podcaster in her past. I mean, she's so young, she already has a past. And in NYU, I think one of her biggest achievements, I think she's proud of it, is that she sued NYU actually, against their inability to protect Jewish students from harassment, and even was honored by President Trump back in 2019 at the IAC when he signed, right before he signed the Executive Order Against Antisemitism, expanding the definition of Judaism, thereby under Title VI protections, for all the lawyers out there. So she's really interesting. She's outspoken, and I want to just hear from her where she's at and get her voice into this conversation. Adela Cojab Moadeb, please join us. Hi.
Hi. I was beaming the whole time. Good morning.
Good morning in Mexico City.
Good morning from Mexico City.
Yeah. Good afternoon from Israel
and from the Jersey Shore.
Yeah, nothing to be proud of that.
Hey, I
Mexico
grew up
City
on
is a
the
great
Jersey
city.
Shore.
Oh, you did?
I did.
Ah, yeah. So I'm here.
Remember, I'm Syrian, Deal, New Jersey.
Yeah, there you go. My mom is very proud of being liberal and modern, but she always laments when she sees all the families together on Friday night. She's like, oh, they're all together. Why aren't you here? Yeah.
So you've managed to pack a lot into your young years, I must say. Is NYU the first time you ran into anti-Semitism? We like to find out about every guest here, like where did they meet their swastika or whatever that was.
Well, it was definitely the first time I saw it directed towards me, right? I had already realized that Judaism was different from everything else, just growing up.
It's a liability,
Yeah, it's a lie, but well, I mean, it kind of like keeps you out of a lot of very cool clubs. So the first time I felt my Judaism made me different, it wasn't exactly anti-Semitism, was I went to yeshiva day school. I went to Hillel, full of Syrian Jews, and all my friends were Syrian Jews, and I thought I was very worldly because I was so world traveled and my family's international. But then my mom put me in cheerleading with our local county, and our games were all Friday nights and Saturdays. So suddenly I was going to every practice, but they wouldn't really put me in the dance because they knew I wouldn't actually be there on game day. And, I would ask my mom, well, why can't they just do it on Sunday? And she said, because the world doesn't revolve around Jews. So that was the first time that I realized, oh, we're a minority and the world doesn't revolve around us as much as the media would have you think otherwise. But yeah, the first time I saw anti-Semitism directed towards me was definitely NYU. And it was as early as my freshman year, and it continued throughout until after my senior.
Did you do something to deserve it?
Oh, did I do something to deserve it? Imagine being openly Jewish with your identity. I mean, well, it depends who you ask. If you ask the students at NYU, they weren't anti-Semitic, they were anti-Zionist. Right. So I deserve it.
So for you, it was a convergence with the Zionism from day one. Because not
Yeah, for
everyone is
me,
that
well,
like
it
it.
wasn't originally. I think that, I was in the yeshiva system, but back in the day, they didn't do a good job prepping you, especially not students, going into college. I'm also Syrian, so a lot of students weren't going to college. But, the word Zionism itself wasn't really something that was taught to me. I just figured you're Jewish, you're pro-Israel. So I did have my first 2 years in college, I did have to have that soul searching where I kept having to ask myself, is it okay to be anti-Zionist? Do I consider that anti-Semitic? And to me, it really comes down to the context. I hate using that word, especially here, but at NYU, you'll find a lot of students who are anti-nation state. They don't believe that any country should exist. And from them, I'll take the anti-Zionism. You're right, at least you're consistent. There shouldn't be any countries. Jews shouldn't be any different, sure. But it came down to the double standard.
So I want to probe on that, because I'm happy you brought it up, because we're like, I think a lot of people don't really understand. We've had a few guests who were who sort of matured with their relationship with anti-Semitism through academia. We had a guy, what's his name, Seth, that was fighting it on Rutgers. I think he canceled the BDS chapter there, right? What was his name? Forget, Simon something. Anyway, so we talked to people, but I think you're the first one who really kind of, the second thing you said was like, oh, they don't believe that there should be any state. So how does that work? Maybe give people who are, who haven't been to college for a few years already, what's the mindset down there? Like how do people see the world from?
How do you pay $80,000 a year and then say, oh, I don't want any countries?
Yeah. So let me take you into the mind of the millennial and Gen Z college goer.
Nice.
Which to them, they always say that the saying goes that if you're conservative when you're young, it's because you don't have a heart. And if you're, left-leaning when you're older, it's because you don't have a brain. And that's the saying and how it goes. But really, when it comes to college campuses, the prior one of that is 100% true. Everyone falls into two categories when it comes to college kids, to me, on the anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism front. There's the diehards who usually have a personal stake in the conflict. They're the ones whose families are from the Middle East, or they're the ones who feel so wronged by society because they're genderqueer, non-binary, and non-conforming and fighting oppression. And they really do believe what they're spewing. They don't believe anything should be a country. If you try to spin it to them and say, well, what about the United States? Isn't the United States stolen land? And they will answer yes. They will answer yes, and they don't believe that we should be here.
I'm sorry, but just the one thing, there's a famous line from George Carlin. I don't know if you know him. He's dead already.
And of community.
but he's like, if everybody's from somewhere, nobody's from anywhere, right? If you want to trace everyone to something, it's like it's Africa at some point. But other than that, everybody is moving, and that's human condition. So what are they actually talking about? Return to what state?
Exactly.
Are they?
That's my favorite. Just to go on a fun tangent. Back when I podcasted, I had a podcast called American-ish, which was all about being a Syrian, Lebanese, Mexican Jew. My co-host was an Egyptian Coptic Christian, and we were two modern women who love tradition, navigating all these different complexities. But we had a subset of that podcast called Hyphenated. And it was all from people with hyphenated identities, like Syrian, Lebanese, Mexican Jew. And the first question I asked every single one of my guests was, where are you really from? Because for me, if you say, where am I from? I'll say, I'm from Mexico. And people will look at me and they'll say, where are you really from? And I say, oh, you're right. My family's from Syria and Lebanon. And then they'll say, well, where are you really from? And I'll say, you caught me. Guess I'm just a Jew. Like, what do you want me to say to that? Right.
I'm from everywhere.
Right. And I love teasing that question out of people. The where are you really from is one of my favorites. But yeah, so exactly that stems from the second bucket of people. So the first bucket, diehards, they fully believe in what they're saying. The second bucket, they're what I call the human rightsers. And they're all taught about fairness, and they're taught about equity and quality of outcome and the unfairness of the world and how they contribute to the unfairness. So unlike the ones here that feel that they themselves are oppressed, and that's why they have a personal stake in this, in liberation, who really believe it and drink the Kool-Aid, they all started as the human rightsers. They all started as the ones who were told by their professors that they themselves play part of a system and it's their responsibility to dismantle it. Why? Because there's unfairness in the world. And if you benefited in any way from that unfairness, then it's on you to change it. And when you're, 18, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, leaving your parents' house for the first time, you show up to a college campus in loco parentis, and whose word is law? Your professor. You look up to them. You want to be like them. So it really, to me, and I say this all the time, everything stems from the professors. And whenever I talk to anyone, who tells me, well, we've lost college campuses, we've lost this, we've lost that, I say, no, it's about time we take a page from the book from BDS. Yes, they were trying to boycott Israel, but at the same time, they were sponsoring professorships. You have so many sponsored professorships, and that's how you change a curriculum. So instead of pulling your donations from a school, redirect them and sponsor a professorship. That's what we should be doing. That's how you change a curriculum. And the issue is that, us as Jews, we were always taught, you keep your head down when you have to, you go in, you do your job, you get out. So when we had all the anti-Semitism on campus, it was being led by the professors. They were the ones that were stoking the flames. And when I went to the many Jewish professors, and not just professors who happen to be Jewish, I'm talking professors of Israel studies, professors of Judaic studies. And I said, hey, I'm a student here and I'm struggling. Can you please help me? There's a boycott of 70 professors against Israeli academics. Like, this also involves professors, not just students. Every Jewish professor told me the same thing, which is, we don't get involved in student affairs. And I felt, how unfair is it that when they go low, we go high, not just when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict context, but even on college campuses, we're not willing to play dirty when they are.
Well,
Yeah,
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's even more. It's the professors, but how did the professors get there? Also, I'm sure you looked into this as well.
Yeah. So it depends on how nefarious you want to be with your intentions. Of
Very.
course, there's been so many studies that have come out that I can quote that trace their funding directly to Qatar. And there's been a lot of graphs that come out of pretty much their donors.
We've done the graphs, by the way. Yeah,
we've done the graphs, so you've seen them. So that's where that's coming from. But how did the professors get the way that they are? Again, I think it falls into the human rightsers and the diehards. So again, the diehards, I'll tell you. So actually, going back to the first question you asked me, when did I realize that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are really one and the same? And it actually came from a Jewish professor. I took a graduate seminar that I petitioned my way into as a sprightly sophomore in college, called Palestine in the History of Politics. It was a graduate seminar. I really just, I was curious. I was a child, and I said, let me petition my way in. It was taught by Zachary Lockman, a vowed anti-Zionist Jewish child of Holocaust survivor. And when I took this class, I remember in the first lesson, it was all about the kibbutz movement and how it was founded in order to exclude Arab labor from building Israel. And that way they kept them unemployed, impoverished, and out of the work zone.
Well,
but then the kibbutz movement.
Exclude who?
Exclude the native Palestinians. If we're using
the native Palestinians, okay.
The native Palestinians. The native population that we came to displace. But then the next week, we had a whole
aren't Jews the native population? I'm confused. There's been
believe me, we had a field day, but sometimes when it comes to these people, you have to accept them on their terms. Otherwise, the conversation can't move past 3 sentences. It happened when I debated Mark Lamont Hill. Every sentence he said was just so problematic. And so I said at the beginning, I said, look, I'm going to use your terms and accept this conversation on your terms so we can actually move it forward. But if I stop you every time I think that you say something that I don't agree with, then we're not going to get anywhere. And I'm expecting the same for me. So for example, when I say the West Bank, don't stop me and say the occupied territory, right? So that's how you have to go back and forth with these professors. But with this specific professor, one session was all about how we were excluding Palestinians from the workforce. But then the next session was all about how when we did employ Palestinians, it was to exploit them as a labor source. So we're either excluding or exploiting. And it was one of those things that I said.
Well, that's the Jewish story, right?
So we can't win.
No.
And if we can't win, and if everything we do is paint a negative, then that's how you go, oh, so you're not exactly anti-Zionist. You just don't believe that anything Israel does, left or right, anything, is ever going to be justified.
Adele, this is really where every conversation, if a person can stay on the horse long enough, not get thrown off, it always comes to this. It doesn't matter if you're Republican, if you're Democrat, if you're gay, if you're straight. Whatever it is, at the end, if you stay on the horse long enough, it comes down to you're a Jew, and that's a problem to us. And that seems to be the root. And that's the point that we're trying to You ever see Empire Strikes Back? You know, it's like an old movie from the 80s, but there was no.
Sure.
Okay. There's one terrible planet building thing, sphere in the space, and the good guy, the main good guy, just needs to put one bullet, one missile right in the middle of the thing, and that solves it. Not all the thousands of other planes that are trying to shoot you down, not everything else. There's one place in the middle. If you don't deal with that, you don't solve the problem. The Jew, being a Jew is what it comes down to, no matter because the people who feel oppressed, they don't like it because they feel we're oppressing them. The people who, for whatever
Yeah.
your problem is, you can pin it on the Jew. And so
If Jews have money, then the Jews are capitalist. If Jews don't have money, then they're the greedy communists, right? It's just
yeah.
the Jew, whatever you want it to be. It's like build your own adventure. It's the mystery flavor.
So what is in our benefit, what is going for us then is that we're a really small group. And it should be, and even within that small group, we don't need to activate everyone because most of the community follows the leaders of the community. But it seems that it should be easy enough for us to organize our small Jewish community to be an example of all the good kind of human connections between people. Let this small group build a role model of how people can get along with each other, of how people can listen to each other, how people can have different ideas and still sit at the same table together. For all, like, to debate one of these professors you mentioned, I would just bang my head against the wall because you could talk for 100 hours and where are you going to go?
Before you jump to our solution, I'm curious to know what Adela here has been doing. Like maybe we'll hear a fresh perspective. What's on your mind, like when you understand the impossibility of the odds and what's happening on college campuses, which is already a result of, as we said, 20-30 years of work. This is not yesterday. When you look at all the conditions, what do you think is the answer, the solution to this?
So very similar, but I'm going to jump on once I hear your solution. Well, then I think I have a little bit of pushback, but I always say whenever I speak to Jewish students, we really are like the Kiddush Hashem generation. Like that's what you have to try to do. I always say when it comes to college campuses, we need to keep going, right? If at the first sign of danger, we pull all our kids and send them to Yeshiva University. Now, I love Yeshiva University. I went to Cardozo School of Law, love them, will stand by them my whole life. But if at the first sign of danger, we pull our kids from college campuses, that's exactly what we're doing, where at the first sign of danger, we start making Aliyah. And we fought too hard to, number one, win our spot on college campuses, and number two, win the rights that we have here to just give them up at the first sign of danger. I'm very much a stay and fight kind of diaspora Jew. Whenever people say, what kind of Jew are you? I say I'm proudly a diaspora Jew. I love Israel. I'm in Israel all the time. I've been there 3 times since the 7th. I'm going to be there 3 times in the next 2 months. I'm there all the time. And I do love it. And it does feel like home in my heart, but I'm not giving up the land that we fought for. And I'm not giving up the colleges that we fought for. So when I speak to college students, I tell them, you should never deny yourself the education you want and deserve because of anti-Semitism. That's how you allow anti-Semitism to win. And at the same time, I say, if we're not sitting there with a seat at the table that we fought so hard to win, when we step out of the room, what happens? Willingly, right? Because whether or not we're going to these schools, if you look at the Supreme Court bench, for example, you have 7 Yale, 7 Harvard, 2 Yale. It's whether or not we're at these schools, the future leaders of tomorrow are at these schools, and I'd rather they have at least one Jewish friend that they met through college, right? So it's one of those things that if we really place ourselves where we are being right, just people, then people can't see you any other way. And the way that you see this playing out on college campuses was one of my best friends in college was the president of the African Association for Development. I was the president of Realize Israel. We met freshman year before either of us were in any group. At the end of our freshman year, we both got involved in these groups. By the end of our sophomore years, we were both presidents of these groups. She did her thing, I did my thing. We every now and then did a joint fundraiser for South Sudan using Israeli solar panels. You know, we tried to find the overlaps. And my junior year, she called me and she tipped me off. She said, I just want to let you know, I was just approached by something called the Black and Brown Coalition. It's a group of 53 groups that are all signing to boycott not only Israel, the country, but Realize Israel, the group that you're president of. And she told me outright, clearly, she said, I don't care much about Israel, Palestine. I don't know much about Israel, Palestine. And I know I probably side with the Palestinians. But I know what you stand for, and I know that you don't stand for what they say you're standing for. So I'm not saying I'm pro-Israel, but I'm not signing on to this boycott. And her group became the only one of the Black and Brown Coalition that didn't sign on to BDS. And that's a personal connection. That's friendship. So when you go to college campuses, just be a good person, be a normal person, and then people will know that you don't stand for the genocide of children. If I was sitting here and I started trying to justify the genocide of children, I'd be a horrible person. The difference between the sides is that I can stand here and tell you genocide of children is a horrible thing. They'll actually justify it. Why? Because of the Zionist project. So now going back to what you were saying before about, placing ourselves out there and all these things, I'll tell you the reason why I don't think it works. Because even looking at the same exact friend, the difference is that we just try to get them to understand us, to see us in a certain light. And in my case, it happened to work. But the other side gives them ultimatums. And the other side says, well, if you don't stand with me, then you stand for fascism. And for your typical human rights, remember the two buckets, that's something really scary. So they put them between a rock and a hard place and push them into the hard place.
But hold on, you said something. You said that they said to your friend, if you don't stand with me, you stand with fascism?
Essentially, yes. To her, they didn't say that word for word. But if you want to know what's happening on college campuses, why were so many kids participating in the encampments? Because that is essentially the question. You either stand with Palestine or you stand with fascism. And when you're taught that you should be punching a Nazi, you don't want to be a Nazi. But
I'm confused. Didn't we start the conversation saying that they want no borders? They want some sort of some strange, tear down the old and some weird, equality of, by power. It sounds like socialism or communism. So is it basically you're either communist or a fascist? That's kind of where it's at.
You hit the nail on the head in the double standard. They don't believe in countries except when it comes to Israel, right? They don't believe Israel should be a country, but they'll fight for a free Palestine. But they don't believe in borders, but you'll fight for a free Palestine and to redefine Palestine's borders, right? So that's where, for me, anti-Zionism is essentially anti-Semitism.
So
because
they
can't make the difference.
Let's roll with it for a second, because usually this is the part in the show where we say, okay, this is a situation. What do you think will solve it? You start to talk about it. Let's ask the different question. Can you paint the world that they would like to see? What is the world that they would like to see? Let's maybe talk about that for a second.
So it's very funny because this is exactly how I handle all my conversations. I give them the keys to the world. So, Mark Lamont Hill, I brought him up before. It was an interesting conversation. I was on his show and I told him exactly that, because he's exactly this type of person who these college kids follow. They follow Mark Lamont Hill. And I said, if you have the keys to the world, the UN, the US, Israel, the PA, like everyone agrees you have the keys to the world and you get to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He said these words. He said, well, of course, I said, because ultimately they'll come down either to a one-state solution or to a two-state solution, because those are the only two solutions. It just, depends what you want to call that one state. And naturally, he came to that. He said, well, of course, I want to have one state. And I said, and the Jews? He's like, well, the Jews get citizenship. I'm like, okay, so a one-state solution. He said, yes. He's like, and we would call it Palestine. I'm like, okay, sure. And then he said, and it would be a secular democratic state. And that's where I started laughing. And I said, exactly. And he said, what? And I said, you think that if you went to anyone in Gaza and you're like, I just found the solution for you. They just gave me the keys. We got this. We've got a secular democratic state for you. I said, you do understand Gaza operates under Sharia law and it's an autocracy. It's not a democracy. So if you're going to pitch them a secular democratic state, they're going to spit in your face, because that's not what they want. That's actually what Israelis might want. So it's that fun.
Also a question, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Also a question. Also a question. Depends which Israeli. But it's one of those things where I said, yeah, like people in Tel Aviv are more likely to accept a one-state solution than anyone in Gaza or the West Bank at this point, right? So it's one of those things that if you actually want to know what the ideal solution for people in the West Bank and Gaza, that would be Sharia law, entire state of Israel, not a single Jew in the land. But the disconnect is that the college students don't see that. Like they don't understand, like, for example, like women's rights, like forget women's rights. Like I asked them, I said, do you think there's a right to abortion in Gaza? You think that they have free healthcare clinics for abortion in Gaza? Obviously not.
That's just ignorance. You know, I think that's the reason to pull the money out of the universities, just because they don't teach them even basic knowledge. But let's put it aside. Let's take this step further. Okay, let's say forget the states, one state solution, two states. Let's say you get rid of the Jews. You put all the Jews on a spaceship, send them to Mars, for example. Okay, you go populate another planet. Okay, let's say.
They already have lasers up there, so it's not that far away.
Yeah. What's happening down here for everybody's who's here? Okay, you took the Jews out of the equation. What are people protesting against? What are they fighting for? What's the world that they want to see? I'm curious because I'm seeing what's happening in Europe, in London right now, in the UK, in France, Belgium, other places. That's not a picture of healthness and wellness. So where is this going? You know, so imagine, you know, you took the Jews out of the equation. They're not the source of all the problems in the world. Where is this going?
Are you asking about where a college kid wants it to go?
Where do they want it to go? Where do they think it will go? Like maybe if we understood the world that they're after, we'll be able to kind of talk about it.
Yeah, they want fundamental fairness and equality of outcome. They want everyone who doesn't have the same abilities that they do, who doesn't have the running water, who doesn't have this. They want to dismantle the capitalist state that trod down. You have the global north and you have the global south. And
okay, let's say, hold on. We'll accelerate it. Let's say you dismantled it. What are you building in its place? Let's talk about that. Let's be pragmatic.
Yeah, they want a communist euphoria.
Okay, but communism, in the way that we know it, failed. Why did it fail? Do we know?
Because it just doesn't work.
No, that's not the reason. That's not a reason. It's like saying, why did the car is not going? It's not working because it doesn't work. No.
Communism failed. If you want to know why I think communism has failed everywhere it's been tried other than Scandinavia and why it works in Scandinavia, socialism, not communism, is because of you have to have enough resources to pool between the people to distribute it. And you have to have a certain amount of resources, at minimum, that each person gets in order to be.
So I'll stop you there because you know it's not true. You can, if you could get in the 80s, you could get Coca-Cola to every shithole on the planet. You have enough resources to get everyone basic, decent, right standard.
40% of all the food in the U.S. is wasted. There's mountains of fast
fashion
clothing.
But if you look at, like, for example, Venezuela, one of the reasons why Venezuela failed, you know, as one example, the most recent, is because as soon as communism started rising up, the rise of socialism in Venezuela, you had anyone who has money who left.
Right.
So suddenly everyone thought that they'd be getting a certain pool of resources that no longer existed.
Granted, but we're looking for the reason, like for the culprit. And I will tell you what we think the culprit is. The culprit is human behavior, egoism. Humans, and this is really the crux of that split that happened on college campuses. Actually, it started way earlier. It started with, you know, as enlightenment rolls in and you know, church is being pushed aside and, like, you know, we're going to take the reins and, you know, science and we're going to, you know, humanism, right? All of that. They made one mistake, that they said humans are born, they're good. People are essentially good. Just give them the right tools and education. They'll make the best out of every situation. Where in reality, we see it's the opposite. Now, it doesn't matter where you go, you give people resources, they exploit them. They take advantage of honor and power and money, right? Not the other way around. So we're positing, not us, not me and Seth, like we're studying history, we're studying
Old Hillel.
Jewish sages, all of that. And we see that there is one culprit. It's the way we behave, the way we relate to one another. That's the issue, not resources, not anything. We have the technology, we have everything. It's because we're shitty people. That's the reason. So
that's the thing that the college students don't understand, right? Like they don't understand that if you gave Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank the keys to the world, they're not building that secular.
Not just Palestinian. Take every
person. No, I agree. Again, if you brought up Europe, if you look at what's happening in Europe, it's not because people are leaving their home countries for a better life, but they're not really contributing to any of those societies in the way that those societies expect them to. So
So if we agree on that, okay, so this might be the issue. How can we fix the issue? And so we were looking at our own sages, Jews happen to, have been thinking about this problem for a while. They've been talking about it. It's been on their mind. And they said, there are these forces working in a person, right? Inside a person, pulling and pushing. The whole Talmud is actually a study of these opposing forces, desires inside a person. It's not about struggles outside of a person. It's all inside of you, the whole thing. And they said, how do you reconcile it? And I said, you have to create an environment. And in that environment, you have to favor love over all these other things and invest in that and help that. And there's also other things you have to relate to. There's like other forces in nature. There's an upper force. There's all those things. But the assumption is you have to first diagnose the fact that you're an egoist, and you want to somehow find a way to raise yourself out of that state. And the only people who have done this one time in their history as a collective are Jews. That's it. We're the only people who've done this one time.
Sure, I'll push back just because I did have an interfaith podcast for a year and a half, so I got to meet people from a lot of different backgrounds. And I would argue that people from, for example, Buddhist backgrounds, Hindu backgrounds, they themselves, like they don't emphasize materialism and egoism the way that Western religions do.
True.
So I would say that they've done a good job on that.
They have, but this is something really unique about the Jewish people also, that when you go to something like Buddhism, for example, and basically every religion, you lower the ego, you suppress the ego. Like one of the four fundamental, what is it called? The four fundamental truths of Buddhism? I don't know. The four main tenets. The first one is like life is suffering, right? And so how do you deal with that? You lower your desires. You lower everything. This is how religions, don't touch this, don't do this, don't eat that, don't go over there, right? And Buddhism, for sure, we understand through that, those traditions. You lower your ego down, and by this, you limit your suffering. The Jew is totally opposite. The Jew is constantly growing, constantly developing, constantly raising his ego. He's constantly growing. He has more desires, more desires, more desires. And simultaneously, with that desire that's growing, meaning as he's coming out of his animal state, and even before that, vegetative state, and even before that, from where this creature evolves from, as that's growing, he has to always add love. He has to always add connection. And this is how everything in reality is formed. It's more complex connection, but it stays in balance. With the human, you have this more complex connection. The world is becoming global, everything. But if we don't now consciously, that's the whole magic piece here, to consciously add connection and love as the ego grows. And this is the point of the Jew. This is what's unique about the Jew. And what Leo said about that one point that, Rashi says at Sinai that they were as one man in one heart. They stood as, the whole nation stood as one creature. All the men, all the women, all the children stood as one. That's the concept of unity that is what the Jews brought to the world. That's a Jewish concept. World peace, world unity, that's a Jewish thing. So
yeah, and it's working with nature, not against it. That's really the big difference, from these other systems that are designed to sort of maintain for a while. Yes, it's good if you desire less and everything, you will avoid trouble. But it's going against the natural evolution, because the human ego has been growing, right? How can I get more pleasure for less pain, right? For less pay? How can I, maybe I can do something, maybe I can, that's been our driving algorithm. And so we need to learn how to live with it, understand that unchecked, it's going to create all this problem, the extreme.
You have to basically create more love than there is separation, more good connection than there is negative connection. And we're in a race against it all the time, this active work to stay ahead of it. If we stay ahead of it, then all of the light that's coming into the world that's pushing us forward clothes in a connected, in a correct way into the world. And if not, it just forces us forward through suffering.
And the last thing, and then I'll let you, because we've been like rambling, but the nice thing about this is that it solves, two problems with one, I would say stone. It's not, but two problems. One is that you're not going against nature; you're going with nature. So that's, so you're benefiting from all this. It's like nature is pushing behind you, right? Rather than, and two, you actually answer the desire of I imagine a lot of students, right? This individual identity, expression, all that. That's bubbling underneath the surface, right? Gender politics and this and all these identity issues, because you realize your uniqueness as a contributing member to this collective that we have. Like, you're unique because of how you relate to this community, which is, if you think about it, is a totally Jewish thing as well.
So that's actually what I wanted to tease out. That when it comes to tenets of religion in general, there's a lot of different categories, but one way to divide religions is whether religion is an individual experience or whether religion is a communal experience. And of course, there's different ways to look at it, and people will have different thoughts on what is what. But funny enough, you did the same thing I had to do in my legal argument against NYU. Because at the time that I argued, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act only protected nationality, ethnicity, and race. It didn't protect religion, because religion wasn't seen as a communal. Like, in other areas of civil rights, it was, but in this case, religion wasn't a protected category. And the argument I had to make in my case was that the way that Judaism functions isn't like a faith-based religion, where it's just, I subscribe to this religion because I believe in a certain God and I practice certain practices. Rather, it's an ethno-religion that has a communal experience that functions as an ethnicity, nationality, or race would. So I had to make the argument that religion is not an individual experience.
God is so clever.
Yeah.
So we didn't change the law. We didn't change Title VI to include religion. Instead, we expanded Judaism from a faith-based religion to a communal religion, an ethno-religion, thereby falling under Title VI protections. So essentially, we did the same thing, except I did it with the legal argument, and you're doing it with the theology argument.
So the question, so now that we're in this area, maybe that would be a good time to ask you, how would you define a Jew? Because we ask everybody who comes here, if an alien showed up and say, why these people, why this 0.2% of humanity gets so much attention, what would you tell them? What is this? What is this? Who are these people?
That's a good question. I've never had to define a Jew before. I mean, actually, I have had to define a Jew, but I don't think I've ever really given it too much thought. I think that the hard thing is that we have to realize that Judaism has evolved to the point that Judaism is not faith-based. It's not just, I believe in this God and therefore I am a Jew. I, believe in this book, therefore I am a Jew. You have to buy into the history, and you have to buy into the communal path, right? I have a friend who's Zoroastrian, and I tried to get him to explain to me, well, what exactly does it mean to be Zoroastrian? Can you explain it? And essentially he said, well, we're monotheist. And he said, we're like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam without the stories. So we believe in God, we just don't have any of the stories that came along with it, which is what illuminates for us the understanding of God. So they have the fundamental building block, but they don't have any of the lenses to view it through. What does it mean to have a kind God? What does it mean to have a merciful God? When it says Elokeinu versus, Amonai, what's the difference? We learn every single letter, right? We were talking about Rashi. Every single letter was placed there for a reason, because we're supposed to learn something from it. And that's where you have the Mishnah, the Gemara, everything that develops. Everything is the interpretation. So if you don't have the stories, how are you supposed to interpret what God is? So if I had to explain to someone what a Jew is, it's not the definition that someone would have used 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. It would be, for me, a belief that buys into a communal way of life, and you have to really buy into the stories. It's hard, because remember, I'm Syrian, and I don't know how much you know about Syrians, but we don't accept conversion. So any form, not Orthodox conversion, not Ashkenazi, Sephardic, it doesn't matter who converts you, you're not accepted in the Syrian community. So for us, Judaism really comes down to I hate to say it, eugenics. It comes down to biopolitics. It comes down to categorizing people by Jewish mother and father. We don't accept just matrilineal Jews. So it's complicated when you ask me as a Syrian what's a Jew versus me as what I'd like to be a thought leader, what I'd like to be someone in academia, what I'd like to be someone in the space that's advocating for Jews. What do I define as a Jew? If I'm fighting anti-Semitism, who am I fighting to protect? I'm protecting all Jews, whether or not they would be accepted in my community.
Okay, so it means that we need a definition that is all-encompassing, that can include
Yeah.
Your
I
community's
think
definition and
the wider the net, because it's not just buying. I'd love to say it's just buying in, but you have so many Jews that disavow their Judaism. They don't practice. They don't want to practice. They say, "Oh yeah, I'm Jewish in name only, right?" But we still consider them wholeheartedly Jews.
not only we, they also the anti-Semites consider them Jewish.
Also the anti-Semites, right? So it's very complicated because on one end there is this aspect of Judaism as an ethnicity and as something that's passed down from your parents, whether or not you want it. But then on the other end, if you look at Ethiopian Jews, that for so many people, so many generations, Jewish mainstream people didn't consider Jewish, but what makes them more or less Jewish than us, right? And I think that it comes down to now in an ever-connected world and globalization, we really have to sit down and ask ourselves, because the worst thing we could do right now is be under inclusive, and that way our advocacy doesn't include people who wholeheartedly believe they're Jewish and are practicing Judaism the way, for example, someone who converted, but as Syrians we don't believe that they are Jews. I don't want to exclude them, but we also can't be so over inclusive that anyone can just decide to buy in.
What would be the problem with that?
That when we become too over inclusive, we dilute our message. And we already say, two Jews, three opinions. If we allow anyone to come and be a Jew, like here's a perfect example at NYU, we had a great rabbi. Her name was Rabbi Nikki. She's wonderful. I'm not gonna, badmouth her, but she converted to Judaism and she's a lesbian and she's not exactly fond of Israel. So, but she's a rabbi at a college. Who am I? She went through her conversion. She went through her Torah study. But I felt, at least in my heart, who are you to come into my religion and change everything about it and then preach it back? And that made me upset. So that's the issue with being over-inclusive. If people can just decide whether or not they're Jewish.
But what about okay, but so let's leave like Rabbi Nikki out of it. You got Jews right now in Israel who are anti-Israel.
Yes.
They're Jews.
They're
Maybe
Jews.
even Syrians. Okay, so what
about those Jews?
Yeah, well, the thing is that if we're deciding that we're a collective identity, we're stuck with every single aspect of our
Yeah, so this is important because pretty much every time tragedies befallen the Jews, it was Jew on Jew that started the problem. I mean, we had help from our neighbors to finish the problem.
Yeah.
But
it's usually
Jew on Jew.
Yeah. The anti-Semites just take advantage of what's happening, but it's really
well, we have spread abroad from the very beginning. We already knew that there were those among us, right? So it's hard. And I think the way I describe it to people always is I talk about buckets, and I talk about how we have to have the buckets to catch the people who are falling. And I truly believe that when it comes to anti-Zionist Jews, of course, not every single one, I think it comes from a place of disenfranchisement and rejection. And that's why you see a lot of people in the LGBTQ community who end up falling to the anti-Zionist left. Why? Because in their communities, they weren't accepted, they were shunned, they felt themselves, and then they found an unconditional love community where the only thing you have to do is say you hate Israel, and not only do they accept you, but they lift you up. You're certainly the greatest in sliced bread. Why? Because you're the perfect token. And I don't think that they're using them as tokens nefariously. I think they do wholeheartedly accept each other because they all bought into the same ideology. But I think that that's
for now, until the Sharia law kicks in, and then it's
yeah, well, no, I had a Syrian Jewish kid. We grew up together. He was from Brooklyn. I was from Deal. He came to Deal in summers. Like we knew each other before NYU. Then we both went to NYU freshman year. We ran into each other all the time. He was very clearly gay since we were young. Freshman year, his parents didn't let him dorm. Second semester, he was allowed to dorm. I didn't see him again until junior year, where I spoke at the BDS vote, of course, against. And I said, as a Syrian Lebanese Mexican Jew, I wholeheartedly stand against BDS. And then he stood up. I hadn't seen him in a year and a half. And he said, as a Syrian Jew of color from the same community you grew up in, I can't imagine anything that I more wholeheartedly support than BDS. And why? Because in that year that he was allowed to dorm. Why? Because his parents that made him commute were shunning him away. He goes to college. He starts developing more of his own sense of identity. His parents aren't happy with that. Why? Because we're Syrian Jews, and that's just how Syrian Jews are. And essentially, he ends up going to the dorm, developing his sense of self-identity, getting into a huge fight with his family, which now they mended from what I understand. And he found the community that accepts him. They say you're found family, you're chosen family. And it's not a uniquely Jewish experience. All of these kids came from your typical American households that weren't necessarily wholeheartedly accepting. So all of them end up in college. They have a professor that's preaching a certain kind of thing, all about oppression, all about dismantling. So you have all that being fed to you from the top. And at the same time, you have all these kids who are also being rejected by their families. It becomes a found family. You just have to take on certain identities. And next thing you know, there you go. You have anti-Zionist Jews. And I think it's a failure on our part. I think that if we were more accepting of people, but at the same time, then whenever I speak to people who are more observant than me, they say, so you'd rather dilute our Judaism for social purposes than keep to the essence of what Judaism is. And that's a debate. What's the essence of our Judaism?
So
for
let's,
you,
okay.
But for others, it might be, how can you possibly accept homosexuality? And
Okay,
I say, look,
so fair enough. We can entertain all the extremes, but extremes are they're there to help us point to the good part in the middle. So what would be some guidelines that you would recommend, counselor, to include people in this group of Jews, which again, just to remind us about the discussion, we're not just it's not just about the legal definition or our right to go to campus. We're talking about this group of people, descendants who carry the torch of this group of people that was able, at least once in their lifetime, to figure out how to unite in love above the growing ego. This is what we're aiming for. We're aiming for that. Now, it comes with, as you said, comes with also the stories and some of the rituals and the customs and maybe some of the orthodoxy as well. But it also comes with the modern day standards of living and all that. So how do we take all this big salad and we kind of create something that you can actually put on a menu and not just get lost in it? Something that would make sense, that would attract people. What would be the things? And I, like you said, maybe family, right, is an important thing of that. Maybe the land of Israel. I don't know. I'm just saying. So what would you say?
The solution starts in the home. And I say this all the time, wherever I speak, if I speak to parents or if I speak to children, if I speak to soon to be parents, it starts in the home. Everyone says well, how are you so Zionist? How are you so confident in your beliefs? How do you do this? How do you do that? And it's really because I grew up in a Jewish home where my mom taught us everything we needed to know, not only about, Judaism religiously and things like that, but she taught us the Jewish history, the collective Jewish history of migration, where I say, well, why aren't we in Syria? Why aren't we in Lebanon? And they explain to me how we got there in the first place. And I think that if in every single Jewish home, because of course we can't send every kid to yeshiva day school, it's just people don't have the means and people don't have the desire, it doesn't matter. But if every single Jewish household explained to their kids, hey, just so you know, we're here in the US. We love being US citizens. We're so happy. We have the power of participation, the power to vote here. But it wasn't always like that because our family came from XYZ. You start with your own family history, and then you move outside of your family history and say, and at the same time, there were Jews in Europe, there were Jews in Eastern and Western Europe, there were in Russia, they were in Spain, they were in everywhere that the Jew has been, they've had to either run, flee or hide at some point because of their Judaism. And then you teach your kids two important tenets. Number one, you say, we're not the Jews of the past that are running and fleeing. We're the Jews of today, where we stay and we make sure that people understand that we belong here. So that's why you get rid of that anxiety, that aliyah anxiety that I called it before. And you say, you belong here, you have every right that every other person has, and you deserve to use them, so don't be afraid to use them. But then number two, you explain to them that at the end of the day, fundamentally, you aren't like everyone else around you. Which means that number one, you hold yourself to a higher standard, whether or not you want to. That's what I was taught, and that's how I live my life, hopefully. That's what it means to be Jewish to me. But also number two, it means that you understand that your allies are each other. And at some point, someone who might have been your best friend for years might turn against you. And that's not reflecting on them, it's reflecting on society. So how do you move forward from there? And that's exactly where we were getting to before. How do you move forward from there? By preaching more love than ego and by showing that religion is in itself not an individual experience. It is a communal experience. And if we can have other people communally experience that with us, or at least understand the glimpse of our world, then that's how you move towards it, right? It's very easy to hate something that you don't know. That's why we have to be going to these schools so people can know what a Jew is. My friend, she understood what a Jew was because she met me, right? I was her gateway into Judaism. And I'd like to think I did a good job. So I think really it has to start in the home by starting with the communal histories of migration, understanding that it's not the Jews of the past. We do belong here, use your rights, but at the same time understand that being different, being Jewish makes you different. Being different makes you a target. And that means that when push comes to shove, at some point you might have to be on your own. Because that will help those students that don't see past the now to understand that For an anti-Semite, they'll always be a Jew.
So this
Adele,
is yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead,
yeah,
sir.
so Adele, this is super pragmatic, and I'm into it, and I think it's a huge. If we could accomplish this, it's a very good foundation. I think that probably similar conversations go on maybe in an African American home, and a similar conversation maybe goes on in a family that came from India. Uh, this probably is a tenet for all humanity, what you just described. That
It's
every
make real
child
friends,
grows.
but don't lose sight of who your real friends are. That's what it is.
Say it again.
Make your friends. It's your responsibility too, but don't lose sight of who your real friends are. Whether, like, when push comes to shove, don't put all your eggs in a basket that isn't yours.
So
Okay. Oh, okay. Go
okay,
ahead,
okay,
Shrinkler.
no,
I
no,
wanted
no,
to. I wanted to.
no, no,
Open.
keep going. Go
So
on.
this is very, very pragmatic, and I know you. Are you an attorney? You went to law school. You also an attorney?
I
Yeah.
just took
Okay.
the
So
bar exam last week. I'll be an attorney hopefully in October.
Okay.
Oh,
We're rooting for you. Yeah. Congratulations.
We need more attorneys. Like God. No.
That's what the Jewish community needs, more attorneys.
More
So
attorneys.
no, you think very clearly and very pragmatically. Okay. Uh, I can't help constantly be like floating off into the sky. We're very boots on the ground also. But this conversation requires small percent, 5%, 10% head in the clouds, because because we're Jews and we survived the Egyptian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, right? All of them, the Spanish, the Germans, like it's just something magical or additional about this 0.2% of the population. So my question, what I'd like also to hear from you, is something really big picture. Like if you had the keys, if the UN and the US and Israel and everyone was gonna say, okay, Adela, what are we doing? What's gonna happen this year? How, let's see what you can do for us. What is the really big picture? And you can stretch your hand as far back into history as you want, and as far into the future as you want. Like, what is the big picture for us? Because, well, yeah, let's leave it there. What is that? What is the Jewish vision? Is it just that the African American families do like this, the Hindu families do like this, the Jewish families do like this, and pragmatically everybody organizes themselves on this rock, that's spinning around the sun? But is there a bigger picture? Is there something more that being a Jew has to do with? Is there some bigger plan for all of this?
Think big. Think big.
Well, I think we think big by seeing what's directly ahead of us, at least for me. So if you're asking me what the big picture is, it comes down to Lihiotam Chofshi Be'artzenu, to be a free nation in our land.
In the diaspora.
Well, that's actually the caveat I was going to give. But it doesn't mean that every Jew in the world has to be living in Israel. It means that we should always feel free to have a nation in our homeland. It should always be an option, and it should always be available for every Jew in the world. And not just as a contingency plan, but because that's what I think, we have to ask ourselves, well, what's a world of homeostasis? To me, homeostasis looks like that. I don't think in the time of Mashiach, every Jew is going to be living in Eretz Israel. Even in the time of, King David, King Solomon, like Shlomo and David, Jews would make pilgrimage to Jerusalem, but they were also living in the outskirts. They weren't only living in biblical Israel, right? So the diaspora never died. The diaspora's always existed. And if you look at the Torah, the whole beginning before Matanat Torah, we weren't even in Eretz Israel. We were purely diaspora. And then we got the land of Israel. We had so many times where we were diaspora, there were two things that were consistently true. There were always Jews in the state of Israel after Matan Torah, number one. And number two, there were always Jews outside. The diaspora can't exist without Israel. Israel can't exist without the diaspora. So if you're asking me to zoom out as much as I possibly can, it's about time that both factions realize that the other is just as valid, right? You have the Jews that say to the Jews of the diaspora, it's time to come home. Then you have the Jews like me that say to the Jews of the Aliyah panic, it's time to stay and fight. And I think that when we start balancing those and realizing that the fight for Israel is a fight that every Jew in the diaspora needs, because it's the only way that we as Jews of the diaspora can exist comfortable in their identities, right? Instead of fight or flight, you stay and you say, like, if Israel didn't exist, and right now we had all the same anti-Semitism, but the state of Israel didn't exist, my only option would be to hide my Judaism. Hide my Judaism or leave somewhere else where I'm going to have to hide my Judaism until I feel comfortable enough showing it. I'm in Mexico right now. That's how it happened here. We had to leave Syria. And when we came to Mexico, we didn't come gung-ho with Magen Davids. We kept a low profile until it became safe enough to establish ourselves as a community. And even now, we don't have activists the way that we have in the US. In the US, we have so many wonderful voices. We have Leslie Savetsky, Noah Tishby. We have, so many amazing voices. In Mexico, we don't have any. Why? Because the community doesn't draw attention to itself. They keep a low profile because they understand that they're guests in a host country. They haven't understood that it could be safe here because it won't be safe here. It's a Catholic country. So if you're asking me to zoom out, big picture, what are we fighting towards? What's the end goal? The end goal is a state of Israel that is always safe and secure, because that ensures the safety of Jews in the diaspora. Does that make any sense?
It
Yes,
does.
For us, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, no, for us, it makes a lot of sense. I think the thing that I'm missing, that I want to add actually to this vision, is that behind this standing strong, as you describe it, that we present, that we also carry with us this sense of mission that we have. That Jews, as Jews, we are this complex group, this microcosm of humanity, because we need to demonstrate that there is a different way of living, that you can live differently. That if you continue, you don't need to take the humanity into these extremes that don't work. Extreme left and communism, extreme right and Nazism, extreme exploitation and capitalism. All these extremes, they're simply an expression of the inability to stick together. So we need to be proud in the fact that we are the ones who can show that we can actually stick together, love above these forces that naturally separate us. That's what I would love to see, because that's the thread that would carry, through from Israel to the rest of the world. That would be a reason to keep a strong Israel and everything else. Otherwise, there's no reason. There's no. I don't believe there's some judge sitting somewhere here in this world and saying, oh, these Jews, they really do deserve a better attitude. Like nobody owes us anything. People's opinions can.
The UN gave us the country, and the UN could take it away.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, a host country can flip its attitude towards you overnight. Even in America, we're this close to a flipping attitude, and everybody's like, screw them,
They cause too many problems.
Yeah, we don't need them. Goodbye. No, but nobody owes you. It's not like, they should. They're people like us. No, people don't think this way.
You just got down, whether or not you wanted to the fundamental root of the difference between our ideology and the ideology of a typical millennial or Gen Z kid on a college campus. Because that first basket I spoke about, the diehards, they do believe that it's owed to them, and they believe that the world owes them fairness and equality and everything that they in their minds believe they deserve.
We understand that.
We have to fight for it. Right.
No.
So you got down to we were trying to understand, well, what's the difference between our thought processes, our psyches? We can try to go with everything, but you really just boiled it down to, like you said, the world doesn't owe us anything, and we really have to go out and make our way.
But I'm sorry to cut you off, but the make our way thing, that's the thing that we're most concerned about, because if we make our way according to nature's way, the way nature wants to evolve, this is the point of conscious evolution. That's unconscious evolution finished with still vegetative animate people to this. That's it. Beyond this, we got to evolve consciously. We got to be a part of that next level of our development. We won't just get there by just by surviving. We have to exercise some effort, and that's the effort. But it has to be aligned with where nature is pushing. So it's not just fight for something; it's fight for the next degree that nature is pushing us to go. And our Jewish sages talked about it. If you look at nature, you see that this is where
Spiegler, it's confusing when you say nature. I'm with you because you're my friend forever.
But even laws of nature, you look at mold.
But you mean
look how
Torah,
beautiful mold is.
God, nature, whatever. It's all wherever this thing is leading us.
There's something that's leading us, and when we move in harmony with it, then you can be strong and proud, and you can have that backwind and everything. And otherwise, we're falling short. I don't know. What do you think? I mean,
I think you're right. I think it's hard for me because again, I grew up in a yeshiva league Syrian bubble, but then when I get out in the real world, I realize that Jews are so much more than what I think it is. So yeah, there's a lot of Jewish people that I'm sure I could sit down with and wouldn't be able to have a single conversation with about this because they see it so fundamentally different. If there's the Jews in the world that for them Judaism is an individual experience, and it's an individual experience that they decided to reject, and they don't see their religion as communal in any which way. And that's the issue, because I think that when it comes down to the Jews that are tuned in, right, the ones that have, that like all of us, I don't know, all of your backgrounds, you're historians, but you're also, well versed when it comes to Tanakh. There's Jews in the world that are, the Sunday school type of Jews, right? They went to Torah class once a week when they were in elementary school, and that was it. And how do we get them on board to understand any of this, let alone the communal nature of the relationship of Judaism and Jews to each other? So I think that's probably, like, if we're asking, because I am pragmatic, what's the next step we should be taking is, before we continue in our own little tuned in circle to try to make sense of all of this, once we understand big picture, like, the big vision, then it's time we turn to our fellow Jew. But we have to start with what they understand, which isn't going to be the metaphysical. It's not going to be the theological, and it's not going to be the ideological. It's going to be the communal, because that's what they can see and feel.
Going to be the what? The communal?
Hmm. And
This is what those
LGBT,
this is what they're looking for. I think a person who, I could be wrong about this, but a person who feels love, a person who feels connected, they typically don't need to, I mean, if it's a good, healthy love, then they feel that they're not searching for it. They don't feel lost. They don't feel purposeless in their life. So to create this kind of community that accepts everyone, that has that's very, very flexible. It has its own, for sure. Like you said, you can't just open your arms to everyone. That's also totally destructive. You can't just, like we see from our southern border, you can't just, yes, we want everyone to have a good life. Doesn't mean I invite everyone into my home tomorrow. That'll destroy the schools, destroy my home, and it's dangerous. But we're such a small group that and everything we do ripples throughout humanity. It's weird. This is one of the things that, like Leo keeps mentioning, nature. One of the things we really have going for us is that everything we do ripples through humanity, ripples through law, ripples through entertainment, ripples through government, ripples through the financial world. So if we can figure out a way that just a small group at first, and then just keep adding more circles, I think you're right that we need to disseminate the message really far and wide. But as far as like those active forces, we can start with smaller groups and like concentric circles around that, with this really focused vision. And hopefully we can stay on this horse and take it, ride it into the proverbial sunset, into some magical, wonderful reality for everyone.
Inshallah. Yeah.
Inshallah.
Adela, we ask our guests to read a quote at the end of every show from one of our sages. I have picked something for you. It's not like, it's still a little longer than 2 lines, but I think you can handle it. You have a way with words. So if you
Who's it from, Leo?
It's from Baal Sulam, Yehuda Ashlag Baal Sulam. It's from an article he wrote in the 30s called Peace in the World. It's part of a whole tractate of articles that he wrote after right before the Holocaust, trying to warn the Jews about the coming Holocaust, trying to get them to move to Israel, and they couldn't see it. He could see where it's going, again, because of just following the natural evolution. It's like, oh, you keep pushing this direction, you end up with Nazism, you end up with death to Jews, you end up, like, it's clear to see it. Now people can see that too, today as well. So he wrote all those articles trying to wake people up. I mean, he was an Orthodox Jew and everything. He was a judge in Warsaw, right? But he came out against all of that to try to get people to wake up to that true purpose. Speaking of, right, belonging and all that. So he was excommunicated eventually, moved to Israel. But so this
Like
bit of
all
text
good
is-
Kabbalists, they were
yeah, all good Kabbalists. Yeah. So
they were
if you
first
can
hated and
read
then
it,
accepted.
that would be phenomenal, and we can kind of
And just a warning, my computer is on 1%, so I'm hoping
yeah,
it has
let's
enough.
go.
Okay, let's go.
All right. So we'll thank
Let's go.
Adela if she can hear us afterwards. She was amazing,
Thank
and
you.
you're gonna read us away. Go for it.
I hope it makes it through. Okay, so the benefit of each person within his collective is evaluated not according to his own benefit, but according to his service to the public. And vice versa, we appreciate the measure of evil of each and every individual only according to the harm one inflicts upon the public in general, and not by one's own individual value. These matters are crystal clear, both from the perspective of the truth in them and from the perspective of the good in them. This is because what's found in the collective is only what is found in the individual, and the benefit of the collective is the benefit of each and every individual. He who harms the collective takes his share in the harm, and he who benefits the collective takes his share in the benefit, since individuals are part of the whole, and the whole is not worth in any way more than the sum of its individuals. How fitting.
How fitting. Adela, thank you so
All right.
much.
Yeah, wonderful.
For your time. I know you're doing so much, and
Make it quick, Spiegler. She's running out of battery.
Yeah, no, that's okay. We can keep talking, saying how great she is after she's after she's she's not here. So but no, I mean really this is so heartwarming to be able to sit and talk to you and to have this openness and the ability to contain all these ideas, and we're grateful. We need more Jews like you.
Thank you. And thank you for having these conversations. I think, right now there's a lot of noise, and it's nice to kind of sit down, slow down, and try to understand the essence of them.
All right, good luck. We hope to hear good news.
Yes, we'll be in touch.
Let's unite the Jewish people. Yeah.
Yes, we hope you'll remember us when you're famous, and that you'll come to our panel. And she was. This is it, Seth. Everyone, we're the Jew Function. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Go on the podcast and leave a review. Leave some 5 stars. We need it. And check back in next week. We'll have a great guest next week, actually. Norma Livne, with her book about anti-Semitism. This would be fun, I think. As fun as we get. Seth, all the best.
Bye, everyone. Big hug.
All the best to your mom's
See you
birthday
soon.
as well. We'll see you. Bye.